FIBA rule changes for the upcoming 2020 season. Shout out to Kevin for the great suggestion of making this video. This video will be categorized in what I deem major, minor, and additional information. Major will be about important changes that you will see often in games and will be the focus point for mostly all referees. Minor changes will be mostly wording changes that have a smaller effect on the game that should be known. Additional information will be for those that want to know the rulebook front to back, high-level referees that use IRS, which is the instant replay system, and or people who just want to know all the changes involved. This will also be in the order of talking points. Important to note that all highlighted material has been changed or added to this year's rulebook in comparison to previous rulebooks. Looking at major changes, and first one up is active shooting. The wording that was changed added more clarity to the rule and took away the rip-through foul as a shooting foul. The highlights for shot, tap, and dunk is just to be more consistent on the definitions. The added definition of a continuous movement is crucial since the last rulebook did not clearly separate the actions of a shot and a drive as shown here. They used continuous movement interchangeably that caused some confusion and said a shooting motion is usually upwards. They clearly separated the requirements for active shooting on a shot attempt and a drive or any other moving shots. Why this matters? Now for an active shooting on a shot, it states that the ball has to move the ball upward towards the basket, meaning any rip-through moves are side-to-side motions and not a shot attempt moving upwards, which results in a throw-in and not free throws. This is a major change that the updated wording will affect. Rip-throughs are no longer shooting fouls. Double foul rule change. This one's a little comical because it is true what they are stating. They made a change 2 years ago that if a team is in penalty and the other team is not, and a double foul is called, it is a false double foul because penalties would not be equal. One team might require free throws and the other team would not, so then you'd have to determine what foul occurred first, and they gave you interpretations on how it should be administered. Well, the problem with it is that when the situation occurred, some referees could not determine what foul occurred first, and some referees would not know the process of what to do if they did figure that out. So this resulted in referees just not calling the double foul. So they decided to change it back where it does not matter if one team is in penalty and the other is not. They changed it from saying that both fouls have the same penalty to both fouls are the same category. Obviously, if one is a common foul and one is an unsporting or a disqualification foul, those are not even and it would not be a double foul. Offensive cylinder, last one of the major changes and probably my favorite change, is how they're going to address screening with the ball and leg kickouts on shots. The updated wording addressed these situations through an offensive cylinder. The rulebook previously only had a defensive cylinder, and only the NCAA rulebook had both. Naturally, the dimensions of the cylinder will vary due to the size of the player. Some of the wording change is to include an offensive player, like it mentions in off-ball. But the key change is when the offensive player has the ball. These boundaries are to clearly define what an offensive player is entitled to. After defining the cylinder, it says that they cannot spread their legs or arms outside their cylinder to contact the defensive player in order to gain space. This rule makes the following plays illegal and would classify as an offensive foul. The first play that comes to mind is an arm bar extension used to gain space for a shot, or in other words, a push-off. Arm extends out of the cylinder to gain additional space on the defender, and then they push off for their shot or their layup. The second play, the jumper kick out. When a jump shooter is in the air attempting a shot attempt, sometimes their legs kick out of their cylinder and trip the defender. Then both players fall, and typically the referee would penalize the defense under the thought process, which I believe would be that the defense should not jump in the offensive player's area. Now that we have a defined cylinder, a leg kick out is outside the cylinder to contact the defense, which now results in an offensive foul. Remember, the wording says that the defensive player has to enter the offensive player's cylinder and create illegal contact, which would result in a shooting foul. Yet if the offense kicks out of their cylinder on a defender jumping by and makes contact, that is an offensive foul. Last play we are looking at is the offensive player pivoting and essentially screening the defense. Offensive player pivots to give the perception they are making a basketball play, but sticks out the hip or the leg to screen the defender to gain additional space, effectively leaving their offensive cylinder to displace the defense and gain an advantage. This play tends to be poorly officiated due to the offensive player pivoting to give the impression that they're just making a basketball play and the defender is at fault. The new adjustment to the rule now addresses that situation more clearly. Now on to minor changes. Injury. The minor change to focus on is adding the word assistance. That if a player receives assistance from anyone on their team, they must be substituted. This clause is if they have less than 5 players eligible to play, then they do not have to be subbed. This clarification is to better define what an injured player had to be subbed. Previous rule was if they were not ready to play in 15 seconds or the player received treatment, they had to be subbed. I imagine that there were scenarios where a coach came on the floor and prior to the 15 seconds expiring, the player was ready to go. The coach probably argued that they did not provide any treatment and that they just asked if the player was okay. Now, if anyone from your team comes from the bench area, it is deemed providing assistance and the player must be subbed. They also added that scenario under substitution and correctable errors because it falls under those umbrellas and affects those areas as well. Unsportsmanlike fouls. This minor wording change is to help clarify a fast break. In any defensive deflection scenario, possession has not changed until the other team has gained control. So in the case of defender, which we'll say is Team B, is deflecting the ball and is close to catching it, and a normal illegal contact is made by the current offensive player, which would be Team A, was not classified as a fast break because Team A still had control, which means a Category 3 unsportsmanlike foul is not used. The wording now states that in illegal contact caused by a player behind or laterally on an opponent who is progressing towards the opponent's basket. Now the wording now reflects that situation and better defines a fast break scenario for unsportsmanlike fouls. The score sheet one is a pretty quick change, but does matter in an instance that this occurs. First is if the coach participates in a fight, he is now just charged with 1 D2. So if you wanted to make sure the score sheet is filled out properly or filled out correctly, this is what you want to see entered. Additionally, if the coach leaves the bench area and does not help maintain order, it's a disqualifying foul with the penalty of 2 free throws. The baseline for this rule is it's a disqualifying technical worth 2 free throws for however many leave the bench area, regardless of the amount, and 2 additional free throws for every person that participates in the fight. The only exception now is that if the head coach leaves the bench area to engage in the fight, it is not worth 4 free throws, it is only worth 2 free throws. Additional information. What they changed in the table officials' duties is to relieve some of the duties placed on the scorer. They found that they had the toughest job and delegated some of those duties. Art 45 will now be associated with the assistant scorer. Procedure to indicate the player or team fouls is now performed by the timer. The timer will now have the task of raising the marker to indicate how many fouls the player has after committing a foul, and will place the team foul marker on the end nearest to the bench that is in the team foul penalty situation. They will also signal for subs when there is a dead ball opportunity for subs. Lastly, the IRS, Instant Replay System. Due to its growing importance and how complex it is, they have made it its own appendix section. It used to be under crew chief duties and powers. Now, the reason for it is it goes into more detail on the procedure of IRS and what is required. IRS is used to verify decisions made on the court through a replay system. The IRS equipment needs to be approved prior to the game and can be used until the score sheet is signed. The official has to decide if they'll be using it or not in the game by showing the signal. The crew chief gathers all additional information required from the referees, table officials, and the commissioner, and then starts the review ASAP. Crew chief and minimum 1 umpire shall take part in the review. The person who made the call has to take part in the review. Crew chief makes sure no unauthorized people have access to the IRS monitor, and the review has to be done before timeouts or subs are administered and before they can resume the game. After the review, it has to be the referee who made the call to make the final decision. Lastly, the review has to be clear and conclusive visual evidence if they are to correct the call that has been made on the court, else the call stands.